In 1916, a records clerk at Bellevue Hospital in New York City wrote a memo to her supervisor that has survived in the hospital's administrative archive. The memo is 3 paragraphs long. In the first paragraph, she describes a filing discrepancy she had noticed while conducting a routine audit of admissions records from the previous decade. In the second paragraph, she attempts to quantify the discrepancy. In the third paragraph, she asks what she should do about it. The supervisor's response, written in pencil at the bottom of the same page, is 4 words: "Leave it as is." The discrepancy the clerk had identified was this. Between 1906 and 1915, Bellevue's admissions logs recorded the intake of 4,300 pediatric patients, children under the age of 12, for whom the name field in the admissions record was either blank, filled with the notation unknown, or filled with a placeholder designation like male child or female infant. With no subsequent notation indicating that a name had ever been established, no discharge record connecting the admission to a named individual, and no death record in cases where the child did not survive. 4,300 children admitted to one hospital in one city over 9 years with no name attached to the record at any point in the documentation chain. The clerk thought it was a filing problem. It was not a filing problem. Bellevue was not exceptional. It was one of the largest and best documented public hospitals in the country during this period, which is precisely why its records survive in enough completeness to make a discrepancy of this kind visible. The hospitals whose records are less complete, the charity wards, the immigrant receiving hospitals, the municipal institutions in smaller cities that operated with minimal administrative infrastructure and even less archival attention, produced the same pattern without leaving enough documentation to quantify it. The researchers who have worked most carefully on this period in American pediatric hospital history, a small group operating mostly within the field of social welfare history rather than medical history proper, have produced aggregate estimates that range from 400,000 to 600,000 unnamed pediatric admissions across American public hospital systems between 1880 and 1920. The midpoint of that range, 500,000, is the number that appears most frequently in the literature, always with the caveat that it is an estimate built on incomplete records, and always with the acknowledgement that the true number is unknowable, because the documentation that would allow a precise count is precisely what is missing. 500,000 children admitted to American hospitals with no name. The question that the Bellevue clerk asked in 1916, "What do I do about this?" was never answered. It was told to go away. It went away. It stayed away for a long time. The period between 1880 and 1920 was the formative era of the American public hospital system. Before 1880, hospitals in the United States were primarily institutions for the poor and the dying, places that people with resources avoided because the outcomes were bad and the conditions were worse, and places that people without resources entered because they had no alternative. The transformation that occurred between 1880 and 1920, driven by advances in surgical technique, the germ theory of disease, and the professionalization of nursing, turned the hospital from a place of last resort into something approaching a legitimate medical institution. The physical infrastructure expanded dramatically. New York City alone opened or substantially expanded more than a dozen major hospital facilities during this period. The patient population grew to match the infrastructure, drawing from the massive immigrant communities that were arriving through Ellis Island and settling in urban neighborhoods that had no other medical resources, and the administrative systems that were supposed to document who was coming in and what was happening to them were being built in real time, by institutions that had never needed them before, staffed by people who had no template for what adequate medical record-keeping looked like. The unnamed children in the hospital records came from identifiable sources, and the sources were not mysterious. They were the predictable outputs of a specific set of social conditions that the Gilded Age and Progressive Era created and then failed to adequately address. The largest single category was infants and young children brought to hospital emergency entrances by unknown adults. People who left before any identifying information could be recorded, who gave false names when pressed, or who simply placed a child at the entrance and walked away before anyone inside knew they were there. The hospitals that served immigrant neighborhoods in cities like New York, Chicago, and Boston documented this pattern consistently in their internal communications, describing it not as an aberration but as a regular feature of their intake volume, particularly in the periods immediately following major immigration surges when new arrivals were navigating a city they did not know, in a language they did not speak, without the community infrastructure that would develop over time to help them manage medical emergencies. A mother who did not speak English, who did not understand how the American hospital system worked, who had been told by someone she trusted that the hospital would help her child, but that she needed to leave quickly, or she would be arrested, detained, or have other children taken from her. That mother left her child at a hospital entrance and walked away, and the child entered the system without a name because the person who knew the name was gone. The second major category was children removed from households by the expanding network of child welfare investigators who operated under the various state and municipal laws that gave them authority to extract children from what they deemed dangerous domestic situations. These investigators, employed by organizations like the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, founded in 1875 and operating with legal authority that expanded steadily through the period, could and did remove children from their homes and transport them to hospital facilities for medical evaluation before any placement decision was made. The paperwork that should have connected the child's name and family origin to the hospital admission record was frequently not completed at intake, either because the investigator who conducted the removal was not present at the hospital admission, because the admitting hospital's record-keeping procedures did not require it, or because the child had been removed under circumstances where the investigator had not established the child's name before the removal occurred. Children entered the hospital system under the custody of an organization rather than a family, and the organization's records and the hospital's records were maintained separately with no systematic mechanism for connecting them. The third category is the one that the records discuss least directly, and that the researchers who have examined this period find most difficult to document with precision. It was children whose names were known at admission but were deliberately not recorded, children whose presence in the hospital system someone had an institutional interest in not documenting. The mechanism here varied. In some cases, it appears to have been hospitals managing liability for procedures performed on children whose consent situation was unclear. In other cases, the pattern in the records is consistent with children being admitted under arrangements between hospitals and child labor recruiters, reform school administrators, or the various categories of institutional operators who needed medical clearance for children in their custody without creating a paper trail that connected the child's identity to the institution's operations. The memo that the Bellevue clerk wrote in 1916 sits in a filing category that the hospital's archivists have labeled miscellaneous administrative correspondence. Nobody has read through that category systematically. The 4-word response at the bottom of the page is still there in pencil. The genealogical consequence of the unnamed admission pattern is a specific and reproducible problem that researchers working on family histories from this period encounter with enough regularity that it has an informal name in genealogical practice circles: the hospital wall. It describes the situation where a child appears in a family record before a hospitalization and does not appear afterward, with no death record, no discharge record, no subsequent census entry, and no documentation connecting the child's pre-hospital identity to any post-hospital outcome. The child went in. Something happened. The record ends. Whether the child died, was discharged to a different guardian, was transferred to an institution, or survived into an adult life under a different name in a different location is not determinable from the available documentation, because the documentation chain broke at the point of admission and was never repaired. Genealogists who hit this wall consistently report the same experience. The records that should bridge the gap simply do not exist, and the institutions that would have held them, the hospitals, the child welfare organizations, the municipal agencies, either no longer have the records, have records that are not accessible, or have records that were never created in the first place. The Federal Children's Bureau, established in 1912 as the first federal agency focused on child welfare, conducted surveys of pediatric hospital record-keeping practices in several major cities during the 1910s and produced reports that documented the unnamed admission problem in language that is striking in its directness. The 1915 survey report on New York City pediatric admissions noted that a substantial proportion of admissions to public hospitals involved children for whom no adequate identifying information existed at any point in the record, and recommended the establishment of a standardized intake protocol requiring name, age, address, and the name of at least one responsible adult before admission could be processed. The recommendation was not adopted. The hospitals objected on the grounds that requiring identification before treatment would deter families from seeking care for children in urgent medical situations. The Bureau acknowledged the objection, noted that it was valid, and did not resolve the tension between the humanitarian argument for open admission and the administrative argument for documented admission. The unnamed children continued to accumulate in the records at the same rate, and the Bureau's follow-up survey in 1919 found that the recommended protocol had been implemented in fewer than a third of the institutions surveyed. The 500,000 figure is not a conspiracy. It is not evidence of a coordinated program to erase children from the historical record. It is evidence of a system that was built too fast, staffed by people who were making it up as they went, serving a population that was too large and too vulnerable and too politically marginal to generate the institutional pressure required to fix the obvious problems before they compounded across 4 decades into an archive of 500,000 unresolved questions. That is actually harder to sit with than a conspiracy, because a conspiracy has an author and a motive and a potential for accountability. A system failure at this scale has none of those things. It has a penciled 4-word response at the bottom of a memo. It has a filing cabinet labeled miscellaneous. It has a number that sits at the center of a gap that nobody closed because nobody with the authority to close it was paying enough attention at the right moment. And by the time anyone looked carefully, the children were grown or dead, and the window for finding them was shut. If a detail in this video stopped you, the 4 words at the bottom of the memo, the hospital wall that genealogists keep hitting, the Federal Children's Bureau recommendation that nobody followed. Put it in the comments and tell us which one. The people who find these videos are usually the ones who have already hit one of these walls themselves, and the threads that come out of that are the most valuable conversations this channel produces. If your family research has ever dead-ended in a hospital admission from this period, or if you have found a child in a census who simply stops appearing without explanation, bring it here. We want to see what you found. That is exactly the kind of evidence this community knows how to read. Subscribe if you want to be here when we keep going. We are building something here for the people who refuse to let the gaps stay gaps.